Hello, I am Bret. This is my live show here every week, and I'm excited. We're going to have Viktor on the show this week, and we're going to talk all about DevOps automation tools, where the industry is going. One of my favorite topics is automation, so I'm so glad to have him on. But as you can probably see if you've watched this show before, that I am not at home. I'm actually on the road in Denver doing business retreat stuff, vacation, whatever. And so expect hiccups. So I've got a new setup. This is actually our first time traveling in a long time, so I've got to practice and get all back used to being on the road. KubeCon is next week, by the way, so we will be doing a special live show next week for KubeCon with Sneak. I'm going to have a guest on from Sneak, and we're going to, who may be hanging out today, actually. So we're going to, next week, we're going to talk all about security and do a bunch of DevSecOps reviews. So next week, show up at the show, and we're basically going to bring your files. So we're going to look at your Docker files, Compose files, all that stuff, your manifest, your Helm charts, your infrastructure code. If you're willing to let us look at it, we will look at it on the air and be nice to you, but we'll also provide opinions and allow some feedback, maybe to help improve your stuff. So this is obviously much easier if you're doing open source versus something in closed source. But hey, basically this is a chance for you to have free review. So if you want to bring your stuff, we'll review it for free. But this week we're going to be, it's almost like a good prep show this week to talk about automation and infrastructure as code, because that's really what we're going to be doing this week. As usual, thank you to all the fans over here on Patreon. We've got a bunch of patrons there that pay for this show. Thank you so much. You're the reason that we can continue to do this, and we're stepping up our game this year and bringing more members on the team. And so we expect new stuff, more content, and I'm excited to start showing off what we've been working on. But let's get to it. Welcome to the show, Viktor. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and
it's been
again,
a while.
we're gonna have, and yeah, it has. This is I think your second time this year, maybe.
This year, yes, second time this year. Third time, I think, in total.
Yeah,
so
and you're
becoming part of the furniture.
And as usual, normally if I was in the office, we'd have matching colors, because we both, I think, are like the blues and the reds and the purples and stuff. And so we have very similar setups. It almost looks like we're in the same studio sometimes when we're talking. So let's get some of this stuff out of the way real quick. You're now you're at a new company, Upload, or I'm sorry, not Upload, Upbound. There you go. So your audience probably knows this. They see you on your channel all the time. We're going to talk about your YouTube channel, how the DevOps toolkit and that fantastic stuff in a minute. But what are you doing now? Like, give us a Viktor update.
So I am developer advocate in Upbound. So basically, the things that people know that I do completely outside of company I work for, I do for the company I work for as well. So double, basically, right? Developer advocate, sitting with community, helping people, doing the stuff that I've been doing for a long time now, except that since a couple of months ago, I'm getting a paycheck from a different company, Upbound.
Nice. I think I want to just show everybody what Upbound is. I don't actually know, so let's go over here. I have yet to play with it. What's the elevator pitch here? What are we doing with Upbound?
So Upbound is a company behind a project called Crossplane. And Crossplane, it's hard to explain, actually. So think of it as control plane of control planes. No, so
all right.
Let's say that you are interacting with AWS, right? You use tool, whichever tool you're using, doesn't matter. Send request to AWS API, and behind that API, there is a control plane. Most of people do not know that there is one, but there is one, right? Control plane that is managing whatever you specified in that API request. And the same thing goes for Google, for Alibaba, for Azure, for GitHub. Basically, and almost any serious or big company provider has a control plane behind that API. We are trying to democratize that, right? We are trying to make a control plane that will sit on top of those and do the things that control planes do, right? So first of all, standardization, right? Hey, this is how you define stuff to interact with, to define actually anything. AWS, application services, Google Cloud, Alibaba, whatever that something is on-prem. And then the idea is to move away from CLI-based operations, right? Like do this, do that, into defining states of something and having that control loop that we all like with Kubernetes, right? But when you tell Kubernetes, hey, create a deployment, it's not that Kubernetes creates a deployment. That's the easy part, right? Kubernetes is making sure that whatever you defined is always there. If a pod disappears, it gets recreated, right? If something happens, Kubernetes' job is to maintain the state always, right?
Yeah.
That's probably its main purpose. Now we're trying to bring that scheduling control plane type of capabilities to everything. So why not on infrastructure, right? Why not on services? How about, hey, if you define my database should be like this, how about that database being always like that? Not only when you tell it to be like that, right?
Yeah.
So drift detection, reconciliation, basically making Kubernetes API work on everything, not only on applications.
Yeah, and of course the prerequisite here is that you already at least know some stuff about Kubernetes, right?
Yes, kind of assumption is that Kubernetes. Actually, this is the real kind of like idea, or at least what I have in my head is that we are moving towards a world where Kubernetes API, forget about Kubernetes scheduler and all those things. Kubernetes API itself is becoming a universal API, right? I believe that the fact that most of us, 99% of the cases, is that we use Kubernetes API to manage applications inside of Kubernetes cluster is, to, in my head, just the first step, right? And we can see that Kubernetes, for example, you have completely outside of Crossplane, right? You have examples where people manage their VMs through Kubernetes API. Mac, there is one of the providers of Mac as a service, right? Mac servers, also API, Kubernetes API, and so on and so forth. So it is becoming the de facto standard, Kubernetes API itself. So if you're not familiar with Kube API, then Crossplane can be a bit tedious, but assumption is that you will be if you're not already familiar with it, right?
Right. It's not a matter of if, just when.
Exactly. But you know, the main thing, besides what I said, right? Kind of like not on the first page and stuff like that, but in my head, the main thing that we are really trying to do is what we call compositions, and that's to create opinionated tools and services, but not by a vendor, but by a company. Which is what I just said is probably confusing, right? But so, right now, imagine that you want a simpler way to manage applications or to manage infrastructure and what's not, right? Your first instinct is probably, hey, I will find a tool without me naming the tools, right? That out of the box give me easier experience with managing applications or infrastructure or whatever, right? Opinionated tools. Now, that is great. That works fine. It works great actually, but for smaller setups. Once you're a bigger company, you cannot get off-the-shelf opinionated tool because it might be doing 90% of what you need, but then you will be faced off with 10 or 20% that it doesn't, and you cannot modify opinionated tools precisely. Otherwise, they wouldn't be opinionated, right?
Yeah.
That's how you do stuff. So instead of that, the idea is, hey, how about we create tools that will allow, let's say you, Bret, let's say that you're an SRE or something, that you create service that developers can consume to create infrastructure. or services or applications to manage them. So kind of like a tool to create opinionated tools in a way,
Okay,
if you understand what I
I
mean.
got you. Yep. The
I can show an example now later whenever you want.
Yeah, and well, while we were here, I was mentioning while you were talking, your channel. I mean, basically, I've been learning about Crossplane and comparisons of it, and the other tools that might, I wouldn't say compete because a lot of these are quite different in their implementation, and but I've been learning about it on your YouTube channel, and so I was just sharing it out in chat because the DevOps toolkit. For everyone. Like I was mentioning in Slack, if you heard of Viktor, you've probably seen his YouTube channel because he's doing great stuff over there. Tons of new videos all the time, and it's right up my alley. Like basically everything in here is stuff that I want to watch or know about. So yeah, go check it out, DevOps Toolkit on YouTube. And of course, this all came originally from your books, right? But now it's like we're both now we're caught up and we're now in the world of video and you have some tell me what I mean besides, okay, so you have books, you have a YouTube channel. I think that I had to ask this last time because I forgot about all the different stuff you have. Where else are you, and like what else are you making?
I'm now focused mostly on YouTube. Uh, and the reason is actually, let me backtrack a second. I'm focused mostly on short content because I really cannot get away from, I cannot get out of trouble that I'm in with the books that I published or courses or what's not. You know, things are changing so fast, and then it becomes deprecated or stops working so fast that if I create anything longer than half an hour, I cannot maintain it afterwards.
Yeah,
Right?
true.
Um, yeah. So I mean, I want to go back to books and longer content, but simply it's it requires you to be not employed, I believe. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, to have more than a weekend as your hobby to do stuff, right?
Right, for sure. And that's why one of the reasons why I've never been able to make a book is I don't know where I would find the time. So I'm always super impressed with anyone who makes long form content, right? Like a course or a book, something like that, where it's months of effort without any real feedback, without the community seeing it or knowing whether it's going to work or anyone's going to like it. That's always I really respect that because I think there's also another discipline that I don't really have that well, which is constantly dripping content, right? So like even the miracle of this YouTube live show existing for the last 3 years is not like me because being consistently on the internet and making videos is just not something I'm sort of a fits and starts, haphazard with it a little bit. So it's so bravo and thank you for all the great stuff you make on YouTube because I also use it to learn. And surprisingly, with my clients, like people will mention your stuff to me, not knowing that we've known each other for years. They'll say, "Hey, have you seen this channel? What do you think of this video?" Because they're often trying to adopt these technologies as well, and then they'll find your stuff and they'll ask me what I think of it, and I'm like, "Well, hey, if he likes it, I'm good. I don't have an opinion more than you." So thank you for that. So lately, you've been talking a lot about DevOps automation. So I want to get into that, but
yeah, I mean, I always talk about automation because I'm lazy. I don't want to do stuff.
yeah,
Automation comes from lazy engineers.
Yeah, that's how we got into this mess. I mean, when I was managing 1 or 2 servers, I didn't have to be that lazy. I mean, it was really just making scripts, but you didn't have to scale. And now that we're all dealing with dozens and hundreds and thousands, everything has to be automated or you can't even do your job. So I got in a quandary lately because I had a bunch of GitHub runners all running on servers and it was all automated, but then we enabled SSO and it was on GitHub, and it turns out when you do anything SSO, chances are a bunch of other tools are going to break, especially if you're trying to automate. And then also a lot of other tools don't support SSO in their downstream tools. So then when you have robots talking to robots, but they both require SSO or some form of new requirement, it gets messy and it broke everything. And I found myself actually having to touch servers for the first time in a while because our automation was broke. And long story longer there, I was reminded how much it sucked. and that I really needed to get back to the automation. This was Terraform Cloud specifically, but
Okay, Terraform, cool. No, at least you had it then defined as something, not you didn't go to need to go from server to server, right? Kind of manual SSH into it.
Right. Yeah. So instead of doing automation in Terraform Cloud, we just had to run Terraform locally, but we were still able to use state in Terraform Cloud. Which, if anyone who's used Terraform at all, and you're using it with more than one human, you then have to start worrying about state and shared state, and that becomes a thing that, for free, Terraform Cloud will actually maintain that, essentially that file, the database of your state. And we also use Google Cloud heavily for that as well. But yeah, anyway, a recent problem I had in the automation world that I was reminded of how much it sucked to have to SSH in or write an SSH, what is it? SSH, the one that does SSH across many servers automatically. SSHS or SSH or whatever that's called. I can't remember the name of that one.
I don't know when. I started using CF Engine before so long ago that I don't remember when I did SSH to more than one server.
Yeah, I think it was Vic. It wasn't. It was Jerome Petazzoni, I think, who turned me on to the SSH. Basically, you throw a command and it will do that SSH into a list of servers in a text file and then do it.
Nice.
The same thing on all of them. And I'm sure someone in chat, well, it's not Ansible. It was more simple than that. It's a simple SSH for loop, essentially. But so someone in chat, I'm sure, is going to know what we're talking about. I'm going to throw you some questions we're getting in chat. One of them was, what happened to Shippa?
Shippa, there was, how to explain it? Let's say that I did not agree with the roadmap of Shippa. That does not make Shippa good or bad. It's not really about judging how good it is, but simply artistic disagreement. And I think that it's, when you work in a big company like hundreds or thousands of people, then you can move around. In a small company like 20 something people, everybody needs to be 100% aligned, and I simply wasn't aligned. Not that they're doing something good or bad, but I wasn't aligned, and I thought it's best for everybody to switch, to change.
Well, I appreciate that honest answer. Sometimes it's a little, you don't always want to ask people why they left, because none of us want to throw a company under the bus. But we're all moving around. In fact, some other friends of mine, I just heard today, a friend of mine that works at Docker is moving on, and I'm going to miss these people, but people are all moving around, and not always because the companies we're related to. But the next question I was saving because it's maybe a little more complicated. EKS, AKS control planes have their own vendor lock-in. So how do you send the API calls to cloud vendors control plane? I guess this is maybe specifically to Crossplane. We're talking about Crossplane.
Yeah.
Talking to EKS and
simplified version is that yes, we use API of a certain vendor to do the thing, which is a bit more complicated because of that feedback loop. Because it's not kind of only when somebody needs to create something or update or delete, but there is that constant communication with the API. Okay, state of this thing, and then compare it with the state that you have and figure out whether you need to do something and so on and so forth. And how it's done, I mean, internally, it's painful. I feel sorry for people who need to go through vendor-specific APIs because they are complicated, complex, and stuff like that. And that's why everybody likes infrastructure as code type of tools, right? Because really they save you from trying to figure out APIs. And figuring out API is not a problem when you're one vendor type of shop. But the story is that there is no company right now, hardly there is any company that is not multi-cloud. Even if, and by cloud, just to clarify, to me, cloud is Azure, Google, Amazon, but cloud is also if you use github.com, right? You still need to do something with it. That's cloud already. If you use pipeline as a service somewhere, that's cloud as well. So everybody's multi-cloud. Everybody has at least two services from different vendors. And figuring out those APIs, yeah, it's complicated. Uh, and that's why we are all trying to standardize things. And when I say all, not only Crossplane, kind of, you can see Terraform as a way of standardizing as well, and so on and so forth. Uh, it, the major challenge is that I have a feeling that there is no interest among vendors themselves to standardize, right? Which would be the ideal situation. I think if vendors would say, hey, this is the API, we're going to use the same as you and you and you, that would be brilliant. But that would probably create issues, legacy issues first. Who wants to rewrite everything? And then that would create competitive issues. Do I really want to be the same as Google and stuff like that?
Right.
So we are stuck with tools that actually abstracts all that madness.
Yeah, and that's why Kubernetes, in some ways, is a sort of an exception, and I completely agree with you on the whole Kubernetes API as the sort of the default standard, and that was really one of the goal. I mean, I think was one of the original goals of the project when it was started was, getting a standard API that we could actually start developing against instead of cloud-specific APIs or tooling-specific APIs, and who knows in 10 years how many things will be using Kubernetes API to do things that are not necessarily, like you said, the scheduling, or not using the Kubernetes scheduler for nodes. I feel like this is just the beginning. Like the Crossplane is early, and
yeah,
they're going to get to play in the space as one of the early ideas and early iterations, and I think we're gonna have a lot more.
I can make a bet right now that Kubernetes API is going to outlive Kubernetes scheduler. Because we are, as industry, we are creating strong dependency towards that API. And scheduler, hey, tomorrow somebody can come up with a different scheduler that is doing better job than Kubernetes, and we're going to switch to it eventually, right? But API, those things do not change simply because there is a heavy investment, right? On all sides. End users need to invest to write all the manifests and what's not. Providers need to invest to create their custom resource definitions, which again use the same API and so on and so forth. For good or bad, we are generating the dependency, which is going to have to last for many years.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm looking in chat. By the way, the SSH thing I was talking about was PSSH. That was like parallel SSH is, I think, the name of that tool. I was having. Thanks for everybody was throwing in multi SSH, SSH over SSM, Ansible. All great ideas, people. But no, I was thinking specifically of PSSH. So we've actually, I can't remember if on this show we've done Crossplane demos. I feel like the last time you were on, we did that. We did a basic demo of Crossplane. No? Maybe I'm thinking of your channel.
Actually, maybe.
Sometimes I get them confused.
No, it would be, but I'm too old to remember. The story is that I'm a fan of Crossplane for a long time, so I might have demoed it long before I joined Upbound. Basically, I joined Upbound because I fell in love with the product, and then I went to them guys and say, I should work for you. I like this type of stuff, right? So maybe I did.
Yeah, and by the way, for people watching, apologies for any of the bandwidth problems I'm having with Victor coming in because I am on Wi-Fi, and that is me. That is my fault, not his. One of the questions is Upbound similar to GKE traffic directory? If no, what makes Upbound unique? Is Upbound just a company, or is it a product too?
There is, so think of Upbound as a company that is the major contributor to Crossplane project, and that has enterprise type of solution on top of Crossplane, right? So there are some additional features, usually important to bigger companies, that Upbound gives you. So think of it like Terraform Cloud and Terraform, right? Not in terms of how it works, features and stuff like that, but there is an enterprise layer or commercial layer on top of Crossplane. But Crossplane is the main thing, the main product.
Yeah. Okay.
So is Upbound similar to GKE traffic directory? So Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with GK traffic directory.
Yeah, neither am
So
I.
it might be. What I can tell you without knowing what GK traffic directory is, that vendors right now, like AWS and Google and Azure, are trying to do something similar, parts of what Crossplane is doing. And the part that I'm referring to is that they're trying to create custom resources in Kubernetes that will for managing their own services. Right? That's an
Yeah.
ongoing work that started for a while now. There are also ongoing negotiations that they might be switching to use Crossplane as the main thing to do that, which I cannot say now, but how, it's ongoing talks, right?
Sure.
But all the major vendors are one way or another, with or without Crossplane, are trying to make their services managed through Kubernetes API. That's a given. That's coming. That's kind of unstoppable. Now, who will be the main tool in this area and stuff like that? That would be a separate discussion, but it's coming for sure. Now,
Yeah.
if that's what GK Traffic Director is doing, then the answer is yes. If not, then the answer is no, because I don't know what it is.
Yeah, so a similar question or a related question is talking about the architecture of Upbound. Is it fair, and maybe you just said this about Terraform, is it fair to say that like Crossplane to maybe like this Upbound cloud is similar to Terraform versus Terraform cloud? Or did you just say that? Did I just miss that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I meant. Kind of, it's there is a cloud version that gives you, Crossplane runs in Kubernetes. So cloud version to begin with gives you managed Crossplane, right? So you can get for free or paying, depending on whether you're a free customer or paying customer, control plane, meaning Kubernetes cluster with Crossplane they're running instead of you running it somewhere yourself, right? And then there are some, enterprise features related to security, scale, and stuff like that.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
the
sure.
core Crossplane, that we are kind of like, there is a strict decision. We all 100% agree. None of those things are really sacrificing Crossplane. So we are trying not to really. We're not doing things like, hey, there is enterprise provider that allows you to do with AWS things you couldn't do normally for free and stuff like that. That's
Right.
not happening.
Yeah, because that's part of the challenge when you first described Crossplane to me, was which do you build first, the Kubernetes or the the infrastructure to build the infrastructure? Like how do you build the infrastructure? It's a chicken or egg problem.
Chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, and so I could see very quickly like where I would want to just gravitate to something like Upbound, because the infrastructure to run my Crossplane so that I can then build my infrastructure gets to become a sort of a one-off, and I want to kind of manage all the things without having to worry about just the tool to manage all the things. So I already like this idea of if I have small projects, or if I have a huge team that's already doing all this stuff themselves, sure, they can run it themselves. But for a lot of us, we're short-staffed. We just want to get work done, and the work that we're doing is not the tools that manage the tools. It's usually people like you and I are not just supporting production for customers of products, but a lot of times our customers are the developers themselves of our DevOps tooling, right? Like we're serving two audiences there, and the developers often have the insatiable need for more infrastructure, more places to run things, and constant building of new automation, because everything we're doing, if we don't automate it, then we end up getting, at least in my experience, you end up being too busy to help anyone because you're too busy doing all the things that robots should be doing. So I love all these things.
Exactly.
So the last time you and I talked, or the last time I watched a video about Crossplane, was a while ago. Are you aware enough on the Crossplane side to talk about maybe some of the newer things that have happened? Has there been a big release lately? Anything like that?
And so big release is coming, and right now, very short term, the main focus is on provider coverage, right? To get all the hundreds and hundreds and thousands of services that you have in, at least the big providers.
Right.
And
Yeah, I guess for an infrastructure
so kind
component
of
like this,
we're all
that's
focused on that. That's the focus right now. And then we're a company that really kind of very short iterations. So kind of like what will be Q1, too far away to say, right? Kind of.
right. Right.
But right now, provider coverage.
Yeah, because all these, I'm just scrolling, right? And these are all within the last few months. So there's some patch releases. So we're getting patches, looks like, to old versions. Did you tell me that, so like when we all talk
But
about
those
providers, oh, go ahead.
those release notes are not really that relevant because think of it similar to Terraform, right? Or let's say Jenkins, just not to use competition in any form of way. If you look at release notes of Jenkins, you're getting very limited picture because most of the things are happening outside Jenkins. And in our case, also in providers, right? So you would need to go to, let's say, AWS provider to see what's all new there, right? This is core kind of engine behind it.
Yeah. A random a question I just had. We don't have it in chat yet, but maybe someone's thinking this. So I've been all year. I've been talking lots about GitHub Actions, and like even just I think it was last week I talked about Superlinter and GitHub Actions. So I've sort of, especially for teams that are already doing so much stuff in GitHub, I've been looking at GitHub Actions as kind of like that. It's becoming my automation engine of choice, or default rather. It's like the default place I go, and if that doesn't seem to be the right place, then I've got to, maybe I need to use something like Terraform with Terraform Cloud. I can obviously run Terraform from GitHub Actions, but when I think about Crossplane, I think about, okay, actually in that case, it's now, the Kubernetes cluster, wherever that might live, is now really my automation engine, and it's making the decisions and storing state and doing those things rather than GitHub Actions. Am I thinking of it correctly in that way?
Yes. So your state is physically stored in etcd, right?
Right.
Like any other state in Kubernetes. And automation really, and this is one of the big things, I think, and very important things, is that it is Kubernetes native. And now when I say Kubernetes native, I don't mean because it's fault tolerant and scalable and all that stuff. What I mean is that it leverages ecosystem, CNCF basically, right? Cloud native ecosystem, Kubernetes ecosystem, whatever you want, right? And suddenly you can do things with it that normally you couldn't do. Let's say that you want to apply GitOps on infrastructure, right?
Right.
Let's say that you're using Argo CD or Flux to manage your applications. And you're using those things to manage your application simply because those tools can only deal with Kubernetes resources. So you cannot use it for infrastructure. But since this is a Kubernetes set of Kubernetes resources like anything else, hey, all of a sudden you can use anything that you can use with Kubernetes. Hey, is this how you monitor stuff, monitor your applications? Excellent. That's how you monitor infrastructure or services. Is this how you do deployments? Excellent. You can manage your infrastructure and services in the same way. So a common thing, and at least among the companies that I'm working with, the most common way to actually use Crossplane is not through pipelines, but through GitOps tools like Argo CD or Flux. Now, pipelines still have a role. Pipelines might be doing something before you apply changes or after. Maybe they run some tests. So there is a strong need for pipelines, without a doubt. But when it comes to applying the changes of the state, of the desired state of something, then we are already talking about Argo CD, Flux, or whichever other tool you might be using.
Right. Okay. I'm actually for the latest question on the architecture question that we were talking about. I was actually seeing if I could find a diagram, because I think you kind of showed this yourself. And let's see, this is a blog post. That's maybe a bad example.
So yeah, that more or less, it's simplified version. I would normally, I can draw it for you if you want.
Sure, yeah. But,
yeah. Let's share my screen terminal. I draw on my terminal. and I
Yeah,
can show it.
yeah. So, and before we get to that, real quick, the sort of the nature of Crossplane is because it's this automation engine, like Terraform, it's really all about the plugin model and the providers, right? Like that's really going to be like the biggest way you interact with it is through, like, because when I'm writing Terraform, I'm rarely talking to, I'm usually writing in whatever the providers, values and attributes. And so it's almost like, did you tell me at one time that
Yes
Terraform,
and no.
it can use Terraform providers as well? I can't remember.
Oh yeah,
Multiple
that's
questions.
something we are working on right now. But the answer to what you just said is partly yes, mostly no. Uh, uh, Majority of users in companies who use Crossplane are not using those providers directly. They're using, remember at the very beginning when I said tool to create opinionated services for the rest of the company.
Right.
So in most cases, ops people would create completely new interfaces that everybody in a company would use to manage something.
Right.
Let's say that you want to create a Kubernetes EKS cluster, right? You need EKS, node group, internet gateway, subnets, VPCs, madness, a lot of things. And then people would package all those into a completely new interface. Say, what do you care about? I care about the number of nodes. I care about whether it's a small or big cluster. I care whether it's I don't know, whatever. And then okay, so here's the interface. Kind of like I'm going to create a new CRD for you, custom resource. We call it compositions. That will actually expose to you things that matters to you. So
Right.
rarely, not most of the people never use directly providers.
Yeah, and you're
Let me
talking when
show it. I have a strong need to show it.
let's do it. Let's do
5 minutes.
While you're talking about that, or while you're setting up your screen there real quick, that's absolutely the thing that I also like when I'm working with companies on implementing more automation, and often it's a DevOps team just trying to get the work, basically just trying to get the work done in a way that where we realize that something is done more than once, we now automate it. Let's remove the DevOps human from the process. Let's give developers self-service, like all those core ideals of DevOps. And the thing that always gets me worried is when we go down this path of yeah, let's make our own custom tooling for everyone that we're now then fully spending our time developing rather than moving on to the next problem. So I love this idea of more and more of the tooling being standardized and us being able to have lightweight wrappers, I don't know if that's the right word, around that tooling
Yeah.
for our own teams, right? Is it back? What's the self-service portal thing that Backstage or whatever it's called?
Backstage.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
one
yeah.
from Spotify, I think, or something like that, right?
Yeah, another
Or
open source
Netflix. I'm
project
always
that's
mixing.
yeah, and I haven't really used that heavily in any project. I've just only played around with it on my own. But I love the idea too, because that's one of the things that always ends up showing up is like, okay, great, we have Terraform, we have Ansible, we have all these great tools, and we got automation, and now we need to give the developers a web portal for it, and then that ends up being a whole side project, and it's someone's full-time job now in the DevOps team to make a web app, and it's just it's another great example of how we shouldn't be doing that. But okay, we're now seeing your
Yeah, I
screen.
mean, very quick, just because I forget to say it later. Basically, the idea is, and I'm not talking about Crossplane in general. The idea is that nobody should be reactive. Open a Jira ticket for me to create a cluster. I think that everybody should create services for somebody to consume.
Yeah.
Whether those services are internally consumed or externally, whatever, right? But kind of, if you're an operations person, you should be creating AWS version for your company, right? Or let people use AWS directly. One of the two things. But you shouldn't be in a way, kind of like a stopper in a way. Hey,
Right.
nothing can be done without me.
Right. Yeah, you
Anyways,
have to wait for me to
so
develop the thing so you can develop your thing, and I'm always in the middle.
exactly.
Yeah.
So if you look at, so this is a Kubernetes definition, kind of like if you're familiar with Kubernetes, this is a Kubernetes API, right? Now, what is important here is that if you look at API version, it's DevOps Toolkit series.com. So this does not come out of the box. You do not get this in any form of way when you install Crossplane. right? So I created it myself, and I will show you in a second how I created it. But basically, imagine now I'm a developer who wants to manage my own infrastructure myself. And somebody tells me, okay, so this is the interface you can use. If you create something called composite cluster, you have some parameters. Node size, small, right? I have no idea what is small in AWS. I do not care because me and operator and everybody else, we spoke and said, hey, in our company, we are going to enable people to create small or medium or big clusters or whatever we agree. How that translates into AWS is completely a different subject. That's my job. When I create a service for you, your job is to say, hey, I want small. Excellent. What is the minimum number of nodes? 3. Excellent, right? Now, those parameters can be anything you want. It could be 2 parameters, like in this example, or 200. Whatever we agreed that is the optimum level of interaction for people who are not ninjas in infrastructure, but still should be enabled to manage it. In this case, infrastructure, it could be anything else. And there is a composition reference that I'm saying here, cluster AWS. If I would change this to cluster Google, then I would get a cluster in Google. If I change this to Azure, I would get in Azure, or whatever somebody created as implementations, right? Maybe people in my company created only AWS implementation of this interface, maybe Azure and Google, whatever we agreed, right? And then I can just say something like git, let's say I'm going to copy this to cluster.yaml and this cluster.yaml to production dot, git add, git commit, something, and git push, right? I have already Argo CD up and running in the background. I could have accomplished the same thing with kubectl apply -- file name cluster.yaml, right? And I could have sent it to the control plane cluster, but in this case, I pushed it to Git, and Argo CD will take care of it. Now, very quick. For this to make, so this is from the end user perspective, developer, whomever is managing infrastructure in this case. Now, from the perspective of SRE, DevOps, sysadmin, whatever, all this happened like this. I'm not very well prepared, so okay. Crossplane config, I created 2 things. I created definition KTS that says, okay, so the YAML that I used before as an end user, somebody created Open API schema and said, okay, so this is the schema, this is the interface, and it has version, node size, and min node count. You saw me using those 2. I didn't use in the example version, but I could have, right? This is basically the schema of the new interface that we are going to create for everybody else. And this is where I defined composite cluster, right, that you saw before. And then Crossplane converts this OpenAPI schema into proper Kubernetes custom resource definition, right, which I used at the very beginning.
Right.
And then you have that schema, and then you have implementations of that schema. And I have here one implementation. You can probably guess how this could be many implementations. I have here implementation for EKS. It could be clustering Alibaba, whatever, right? You can have any number of implementations of that schema. And in this case, those 10 lines of YAML that I showed you will be converted. And this is now similar to Terraform, right? Would be converted into what really needs to happen. You need a route table. You cannot have cluster without route table. You need to have a gateway. You need to have a subnet and more subnets. And, this is the implementation of that interface. And this is really bare minimum in AWS that majority of people cannot know, will not know, do not care about. Right? So it's kind of figuring out what you care about and exposing what you care about to everybody. And made custom for your needs, whatever. In one company, everybody might care about subnets. In some other company, I don't care about subnets. That's somebody else's problem. Okay, so you don't have subnets as an option, right? And now, while that is happening, let me go back to what I pushed to to Git. So I'm still talking that I pushed those 10 lines of YAML in
Yep.
Git. Sorry. Now Argo CD still did not kick off, or I made some mistake. Let me quickly check it. If I remember even where I have Argo CD. It would be
So
the
the
first
interesting
thing
thing you're
to
talking
find.
about, yeah, while you're looking at that, the interesting thing that you're talking about there is that, like, because Argo is really just applying manifest, it doesn't, and
Yeah,
this is a question as much as a statement. So Argo doesn't have to know Crossplane, doesn't have to know custom, CRDs, all these custom resources that you make or Crossplane makes or whatever. Its job is just to make sure things are applied and that they're healthy and where they are and like you're
exactly.
saying, yeah.
Exactly. Now, it's just good that we saw no resources found. There we go. So you know it's live, right? All those things were created, right? The things that you might or might not care about, subnets, they're all Kubernetes resources, internet gateway, route table, blah, 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 blah. And you got all that through basically this, right? Simply because in an imaginary situation, I, as an ops person, spoke with you and everybody else and said, okay, well, what do you need to manage infrastructure yourself to be autonomous without spending 7 years trying to learn all the things that I know, right? I want to give you a
Right,
service. You need
right.
to tell me, you're my user. You need to tell me what you care about, and I will make it happen. The same thing like if you're a front-end developer, your users want to click buttons and do something in your website. They don't want they don't want to learn HTML and JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
But you still want to give them a service. They're not sending you emails saying, okay, now I want to log in, right, in your website. So that's a middle
Right.
ground. You have a service without knowing all the details, if
So
that makes sense.
it does, and I'm like already imagining. So what we're doing here then is like if let's say you and I are the DevOps team, and then we've got a developer team that really just we want to give them self-service here. So we're probably creating a GitOps repo or whatever you want to call it. The infrastructure is code repo, and instead of
Hmm.
necessarily having the traditional Terraform and Ansible and shell script loops and all these things that we might have in there, what we're doing is you and I define what it means to create a cluster on our own, or a new VPC or whatever. You and I are defining that, and then this is the interface, this is the resource we're giving them, and so we would give them like a file sample maybe like of these 8 lines or whatever that you're highlighting, 10 lines. And then
Yeah,
when they need to do self-service, they're going into that GitHub repo or Git repo rather. It can be stored anywhere, but that Git repo and say they'll basically look at this YAML manifest, which is way less complicated than what you and I would know, and they're just going to copy that. Maybe we have sort of a directory structure to define certain things, and then they're just editing that, making a new copy, whatever. Argo picks that up, applies it to the cloud to the all the words to the Crossplane API, essentially inside of Kubernetes. That controller picks it up, and then the AWS infrastructure is created for them, but it's created in the way that we want it to be created. And so they don't have to be AWS
correct.
experts. We don't have to be a cog in the wheel. They don't have to wait on us to do something. It's almost like the dream of where you and I mean, like I've talked about this with so many people, where developers love compose YAML because it doesn't require them to know everything in order to do the basics of their tooling. This is just a different way to do it, but it's essentially kind of taking
It's
compose. I don't see anyone doing compose for infrastructure. So this is actually great because this gets us closer to that model of a simple, opinionated ideas that you and I are making for the dev team, and then giving it to them so that they can just copy and paste files essentially in Git, and then boom, the new infrastructure shows up, and maybe there's probably something that we automate with GitHub issues or something like that that would then give them the information they need to move forward, like VPC IDs or whatever they might need out of this. Does that sound right?
correct.
Okay.
That's right. The only exception is that it's not really. I think of infrastructure as being a beachhead, kind of like where we are starting or where we're seeing adoption, but it's basically anything. Like I don't have it in this example, but the cluster that I'm creating, that cluster, once the cluster was created, the same composition could have installed Istio because all our clusters have Istio, right?
Right.
Or whatever that something is. You need a database, kind of like Postgres as a service in Google, kind of attached to that cluster. Yeah, I mean, whatever somebody defined.
Yeah.
It's the analogy that you said with Compose. I haven't heard before, but I love it. It is actually from the end user. It feels like Docker Compose, with the major difference is that somebody in your company defined what the format of Docker Compose would be.
Right. Right. Yeah, and instead of this all being, because traditionally this would start out with, a decade ago, let's say 15 years ago, you and I, if we were going to automate this, you and I would probably make some shell scripts that would do either a bunch of Ansible or Salt Stack or whatever. We were all using Chef and Puppet and stuff, but we wouldn't give that directly usually to the team of developers because they didn't want to know all those tools. So we would then wrap it in some sort of custom tool that we made, and then now we have to maintain, and that's highly opinionated. If we brought on a new member to our DevOps team, the problem is they don't understand all that, so they now have to learn all that script and code because we've made this opinionated stuff. Whereas now what we're saying is essentially that you and I, our DevOps opinion is really just YAML, and the interface that they're using is a even shorter YAML. And I've found even this year, I've been on this project with a larger team where we're doing that exact thing, but we're not using Crossplane yet. So we're still creating some of these highly opinionated shell scripts, Python scripts, with a whole bunch of Ansible and Terraform behind it. And so it really adds to our complexity because it's probably 3 tools that when the developer interfaces, they sometimes have to copy and paste Ansible or Terraform or something like that, which isn't ideal because now they're having to learn even more things. When we're usually already asking them, hey, you at least have to maintain some basic manifest for Kubernetes. So they're all kind of having to learn some of the basic, even just the structure, right? Like just the structure you have there of there's an API version, there's always a kind, there's always some metadata, there's always a spec. And eventually they're all going to be used to that. I think like you're saying, years from now, we will all have at least some experience in manifest, whether that's a Helm or a customized or just pure up manifest. Like we'll have some of that
Correct.
YAML understanding. And the fact that this is already in the Kubernetes language of YAML, I think is just a huge win. Of course, you and I have seen many different templating systems for Kubernetes before. I think at some point there was like 100 different ways to implement applications on the Kubernetes spec. So this is one more, but as long as it keeps pretty simple, I mean, if you were to say there's 300 lines in this YAML file and that's what developers have to interface with, that's when I get kind of, it looks hard.
Yeah, I mean, you mean this?
Yeah, exactly. The EKS, or whatever.
I mean, this is EKS, but this wouldn't be much different if it would be a Kubernetes application, right? Kind of like defining something in Kubernetes requires hundreds of lines of code, YAML as a minimum, whatever that something is. And
yeah,
one thing that you mentioned a minute ago is you said a Kubernetes application, and I freak out whenever I hear that because there is no such thing as Kubernetes application. And Kubernetes itself was never designed to provide that. Kubernetes is a set of building blocks, right? You have ingresses and services and virtual services and what's not, right? We still did not get to the point that there is a widely adopted thing like application Kubernetes.
Yeah.
I mean, there is open application model, right? That allows you to define something called application that makes sense from the application perspective. But when you think about it, a collection of ingresses, services, deployments, and virtual services and stuff like that, that's not an application. If you would go 10 years back in time and somebody would show you all that and say, this is how you define an application, that person would think that you're insane. Right? Those are the building blocks. We still need those abstractions on top of them. Like open application model, right? I'm not now advertising Crossplane, nothing to do with Crossplane. Open application model has a tendency of giving us something called an application that makes sense.
Yeah. In fact, I'm now realizing I'm kind of doing this, and we haven't talked about this heavily on the show. I will probably have someone from Replicated on the show, but I've been working a lot with Replicated, which is a slightly different problem set. Replicated, the company, is building these kinds of application abstractions on top of Kubernetes for shipping traditional COTS, and one of their open source project is called COTS, KOTS, and you're exactly right, like kind of like what Crossplane does. They're creating that layer of ideas of what is an application, and underneath it's technically using Helm charts and Kustomize and some of their own CRDs that bubble up. But at the end of the day, what the developers know is that at some point they're probably interfacing with a Helm chart or a Kustomize or a straight up manifest for their app features like services and deployments and stateful sets and whatnot. But the rest of the DevOps are all dealing with ingress and storage, and we're doing all that. And then they provide this, I think they actually call it it's like a COTS, the API is COTS, Beta V1 or whatever, and the kind is an application, I think is what they call it. And it really just says, hey, what's the version of the Helm chart you're using? How do we describe your application to a human, like the README, release notes, that kind of thing. And then they basically, if anyone wants to look it up, it's called KOTS, COTS. COTS.io, I think, is their open source way of doing this. But it's an open source tool that this is really designed for if you're shipping traditional, like enterprisey software that usually would be, back in the day it was shipped on a CD, but now maybe it's a download of your application. But you want it to be standardized on Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is being that common control and application runtime plane, then you use their tool that's how customers interface with your app now, instead of your customers using Helm directly, because some if you're making software for your clients, sometimes they want a Helm chart. Sometimes they don't even know Kubernetes that well, and they're like, well, that's too much. I don't want to have to learn Helm or whatever. So COTS kind of becomes that middle layer that says, hey, we're going to worry about Helm and Kustomize as infrastructure for you. You just, it comes with an admin panel that you can use, or a CLI, I think it's a crew plugin for the Kubernetes CLI. And it's an interesting idea, and these are kind of not the same, they're not solving the same problem for the same group of people, but it's another interesting way that we're all essentially taking Kubernetes as the common plane for so much, whether it's automation or runtime, or like you're saying, state. Like a lot of times, in this case, it's state and differencing engine. And it's, I think eventually there's going to be a point where it's already happening, where you and we don't even, at some point, maybe don't even have to be Kubernetes gurus just to get our job done, because everyone else is running Kubernetes for us, and we're just using that basic API of the resource list, right? The versions of the resources, the API spec. I'm just repeating what you already told me.
The future of Kubernetes, in my head, is the same as the future of hypervisors. Nobody cares about them anymore.
Right.
Everybody uses them. Whenever you create a VM, you're using a hypervisor. But hypervisor is too low level for you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some people do care about hypervisors. There are obviously people who are writing hypervisors and doing stuff with them. But for majority of people, it's around. That's the future of Kubernetes. Kubernetes itself alone, that will disappear. That will become, hey, like Linux kernel. How many people care about Linux kernel, right?
Right. There's hobbyists and there's those of us that are curious, but how many people need to know about it in their day-to-day job? Usually only when things go wrong do you have to actually learn about those deep level tools when you're troubleshooting. But to a lot of us nowadays, like if there was a hypervisor problem on something, we were probably just recreating the VM. Like we're not troubleshooting the hypervisor or even changing out the hypervisor, right? Like how many times in the last year have you had to care about which hypervisor you're using on AWS, right?
Exactly.
We just use the default, and we don't really care that they have an option. Great example. We've got some more questions here, by the way. Do you think Crossplane will replace Terraform in the near future?
I'm too biased to answer that question, right?
Yeah, that's right. You no longer have you no longer have an unbiased opinion due to the nature. But I mean, the reality is I mean, my answer, if someone's going to have an opinion here, no. It's not that it needs to replace Terraform. It's that both of these technologies can exist, and they probably will be still an excellent use. I mean, there's lots of places where Terraform still isn't replacing Ansible. So, but Terraform
Hey,
is
mainframe. Nobody replaced mainframe yet.
nope, they
Wherever I
still
go,
haven't.
there is mainframe running somewhere.
Yeah. So I think this is another tool in our tool bag, right? Like this is, just a year ago, you were talking about this new idea of Crossplane. And now I can already see where, as long as we've got enough providers in there for me to get the job done, I'm gonna very quickly make this my preferred tool because it has more abstractions. It solves more layers of the problem. I really don't want, I would really love it if my developers didn't have to know any Terraform in order to get their job done. I'd much rather, because they're already in YAML, we can't keep them out of YAML. They're getting used to YAML. And that, especially because we're saying, hey, if we're the ones that are advocating for Kubernetes, they're probably interfacing with some sort of Kubernetes-like YAML file. And if we can just let them live there, I see it as a win, man. I see it as a big win.
Yeah.
There's a joke that you don't have a book on Crossplane. Inconceivable. Thank you, Robot Glock.
I haven't wrote a book for over more than a year now, and it's already a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
There's
will
a question.
probably at one moment.
There's a question I missed. Sorry, Karamaju. Where the 3 nodes in AWS, where are these nodes created? Yeah, you defined that in the YAML. Sorry, that question's a little
Yes.
dated, but yeah.
Yes. So it's that huge YAML. I mean, I can share my screen if that helps. So
There we go.
here, there we go. Right. So if I go through the huge YAML, this is kind of like implementation that you would need to do no matter the tool. It's AWS, so you need to scroll for a long time. Where is it, right? So I have a cluster, I have a node group here, right? And basically what I'm saying, and this is now freakish Kubernetes stuff, but I'm saying, hey, when you get from the original manifest, the one that I used at the very beginning, when somebody says parameters node size, convert that into instance types.
Right.
Simply because that's AWS. I don't know. In Google would be something else, right? Because it depends on their API. And here I'm transforming and saying, hey, but not all, when you say node size, I need to put something here, and that something needs to be transformed. When you say small, you mean T3 small. When you say medium, you say this, because that's what AWS understands.
Yeah, I love it.
And I chose not to expose. I mean, I could have used directly T3 medium and then I wouldn't need this transformation. But I imagine in this imaginary situation that, hey, the users don't want to care about whether it's T3 is large or T2 large or whatever.
Right. And especially whether it's T3 or they're using another, non T3s, whatever, C something, M something, R something.
Yeah.
That's a great, because I know, like, for us especially, the teams I've worked with, a lot of times there's that AWS infrastructure person, right? Like, there's that person that happens to be the best at knowing all the knobs and dials to twist in AWS, and their determination is, hey, especially when it comes to cost, right? There's someone who's got to deal with budgets, and they're like, we're going to shift everything from T3 to something else because the way we look at it, all these things are going to be more effective over here because of our workload types. And now you can basically change that, right? It's another layer of abstraction. The developers don't care because you just shifted the type. I'm imagining that this is almost like, is this a good analogy of Terraform versus Terraform modules? Like, a lot of times with DevOps, we're creating Terraform modules that are reused maybe in a different repo, and a developer's making a simple main file in Terraform that's accessing our opinionated DevOps
Yes, it
module.
would be like me creating Terraform modules, right?
Yeah.
The major difference is that here you get a real definition of something, not kind of like properties file, which is which I assume
Right.
in that context you would be probably changing values file of Terraform or something like that. But more importantly, which kind of like might not be obvious, there is a huge difference, for good or bad. It can go either way, between something being defined in a server and exposed to an API, and on the other hand, CLI transforming something to something else.
Mm.
Right? So it's not that you are kind of like, let's say this would be Kubernetes, that I give you this simple application, something, and then this CLI tool converts that into ingress and deployment and stuff like that and sends it to Kube API. No, you are actually, that object, that resource type does exist in your cluster.
Right.
Kind of like the translation is happening after the API call. You get a new API format in a way, right?
Right. Well, and the nice thing about the YAML, I mean, that's a simple map for you in YAML. So that's not like some other language. So if someone was curious about a small, medium, large, for example, and they're like, well, what is the small, medium, large? They can simply go look. They don't have to go, well, I don't know how to read HTML, or like this is in, this is in some bash script someone wrote that translates it into AWS CLI calls that have to have these one-off long command lines. I mean, I've seen all, like you, I'm sure we've seen all the different types of this stuff where people try to abstract stuff out, and it always ends up in some highly opinionated DevOps team abstraction that is very specific to that team or that company. And I don't know about you, but I see this trend where we're constantly, every team I'm working with, they're always hiring, right? They're always looking for another DevOps person. They're always looking for more developers. And so I think it's even more our responsibility as DevOps professionals to use more of the standard tooling, because we can't expect that new person to onboard to hundreds of custom scripts and automations. And we made a Golang tool just so we could automate out our Terraform. And now you have to know our Golang in order to know what the hell we're doing. I'm not that I'm anti-development, but I look forward to Crossplane being more popular and more standard, so that I can, just like Kubernetes is, I can start to expect people coming in my team, you're going to know Kubernetes, at least at the API level and the basic command line. I can now expect that. Whereas 5 years ago, we would expect you knew some Terraform or Ansible. Like, we're getting more progress in that world, at least. And I feel like Kubernetes is getting to that point where we're expecting that of our new people. I could be wrong, maybe.
No,
at least with all the teams I'm working with, that's their minimum higher requirement, is Kubernetes.
It's kind of, I can bet my house and everything, my career and everything, that's the state, that's unavoidable. And so Kubernetes is here to stay for a very, very long time. And that's not because it's good or because it's bad. Simply because the amount of investment that the world made into Kubernetes guarantees that it stays. So it's not about quality. And I'm not saying that it's not good, right? But simply, if every single software vendor in the world right now invests most of its budget to Kubernetes, Kubernetes cannot go away. Simply because that type of investment cannot be removed, kind of like, oh, next year, I don't want to do it. So we will have to learn to live with it. And now I see it as if it's bad, kind of like live with it. It's good, but that doesn't matter what you think about it. It's here to stay because of the investment.
Right. Yeah. And obviously that's the kind of thing we always have to take the good with the bad. I mean, for a lot of people, Docker is still not, like, containers technology in general is a heavy lift for a lot of people that are sort of laggards in the technology world, that they're now getting to it, but there's a lot of effort into it. I think I was just talking with some people that were, a friend was leaving their job because they got a new CTO that's now like anti-container everything. And because they view it as a burden and as a huge lift for the organization, for everything to be encapsulated and Docker files, and they want to just do pure VMs. There are always going to be those one-offs, and nothing is for everyone. But I feel like you're right, that like the net positive of Kubernetes is that we all now have a common way to describe and to run, and it's a language now, and human language, for us to all talk back and forth. And why not use that more and more and more? I think, obviously the biggest complaints about the YAML is always there's so much of it, but you're just now proving that not everyone has to know all of it. Like, we can have these chunks where the gurus that need to know it, and then now the people that don't have a much smaller not chunk to realize. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the problem, I think, is that many people do not understand that Kubernetes was never meant to be used by anybody directly. That was never the intention. Kind of like, and that's where the conflicts start. It's too complex. Yes, because first of all, because Kubernetes is doing things that we could not do before to begin with. So
Right.
yeah, show me how you can do the same things that Kubernetes does in a less complex way without Kubernetes. Now,
Right.
the question whether you need those things, that's a separate discussion, right? You might not.
Yeah.
But going back to what I said, yes, if you really go through history of and design choices and stuff like that of Kubernetes, Kubernetes was always supposed to be the platform to build platforms, so base, extensible base, and we are still too early in the in this whole story that
Yeah. The life cycle.
we do not yet have the answers. What is the layer that you should be using, right? We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
That's coming, but Kubernetes itself is not the end game, that for sure.
Yeah, I'm so glad you showed the example today because I think that really nails it for me. I think I'm more on board. Not that I was not on board with the new ideas that Crossplane is showing off, but I didn't quite see the application for me, but beyond existing tools. But showing this way of abstracting while not completely rewriting the book on the abstraction, which has been the challenge I think a lot of ways in the past. It's like now there's another thing they have to learn. And that's the way to go. All right, so I've got a few more rapid questions for you. I know. Thank you so much for staying long. I know we stayed a little longer than normal. Thanks for all the questions out there. I'm going to throw in a couple of quick questions just to confirm. Crossplane supports local development like K3D, Kind, and others. I'm assuming that's true.
I'm running it in Kind right now.
There we go. DevOps and Cloud Computer Training just made a comment that they're starting to watch our videos. And talking about my videos on Docker and Swarm. And so yes, go check out the DevOps Toolkit channel as well, because Victor's knocking it out of the park over there. As well as we've got a community of people also in chat. You see some other people like DevOps Directive is in here. He's got his own great channel you should go check out that is talking about a lot of this stuff. So there's a growing community on YouTube. I'm super excited to be a part of that. And we've got a sort of not a question, but a comment there around understanding that CTO's view, may disagree, but I like to hear that their use case is not to containerize. How do you learn so fast? That's a great question to end the interview on. How do you learn?
I don't know. I just play around. I think that I have the same mentality I had when I was 10. So I think that you might get the idea if I tell you the story that, and then actually the process I go through every time interview for a new job post, and that's kind of like, hey, what is this about? Will I be able to change what I do every single week? That's my requirement for a job, and many companies say no, of course, because it doesn't make sense for them. But I just like playing with stuff, and the more you play with random tools, the better you are at connecting the dots between those tools. I think it's similar to kind of playing video games, right? The person who played with 27 different shooter games, he's going to be better than anybody else at a new shooter game when it comes out, right? Because there are always connections, dynamics. And I'm just lucky, very lucky, I think, as a person that for a long time I've been in positions in companies where actually I have a lot of time to play with stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm not bad. I don't think I'm better at learning than other people. Just I have more time at my hands to do stuff.
Yeah, and that's true. You have deliberately, like you've said several times today, you've deliberately sought out a place where that you're allowed to do that, and I think that's even if you're in DevOps, like if someone's in production with DevOps, I think it's also important that you seek out those roles that encourage you to play, give you that time, the 20% time to play on your own stuff, however the company does it. Because if we're all so focused on day-to-day operations that we can't take the moment to try something new or innovate on our own or learn something on our own without having to take weekends to do it. I think that there's an ultimate conflict between DevOps, the efficient forward progression of your team, and not having the ability to learn. So if you're out there and you've got these jobs and you feel like they're not providing you that atmosphere for you to try new things and to take new tools that Victor's throwing out almost every week on the internet or whatever, and trying those in real world scenarios, then that might not be the right team for you if you're someone that's craving all that. There are obviously some people that just want to stick with what they got, and there are plenty of jobs for those people. But for those of us that are wanting new stuff,
you lose something in either case, right? Like I personally feel that I'm not sufficiently proficient at anything. Mostly because my current trajectory on purpose is that I like to try and do as many things as possible. And that makes you not being expert in anything, right?
right?
So there is a value in saying, hey, I'm going to be a Java person and for 20 years, right? And that's great because that person is going to know Java insides out better than anybody else. Or like what I'm doing and what I feel that you are doing, Bret, as well. Kind of like we are more kind of like horizontally spread.
Right.
Plus people who want to be horizontally spread more, right?
And I have a term for it, and I didn't make it up, but I adopted this term of instead of a specialist or a generalist, there's a place in the middle, and so I like to be a master of none. See, what is it? Jack of all trades, but master of a few. We all have a few tools that we've definitely got some real experience in, and we can go deeper. But that horizontally, I think that's very important. Like you're saying, that you know a little bit about a lot of different tools, so that you have, because if we all know just one tool, it always becomes the hammer that we hit every nail with. Every project is Terraform because that's the only thing you know is Terraform, and that's part of the challenge of the art. I think the word virtualist comes to mind instead of a specialist or a generalist. Is like this virtualist in the middle that is you go deep in a couple of things, and that's your area. Me, obviously, it's very much containers and like Docker and Kubernetes, but I don't spend much time on Ansible anymore. So when I'm working with teams, I let someone that's more Ansible, like the latest Ansible, rather than the Ansible I know from 5 years ago. I leave that to them, and but I know a little. I know enough to know what it probably should be used and shouldn't be used for, and that's worked well for me. So it sounds like that's similar to what you're doing.
Exactly, and I think that actually, nobody in today's world, which is very different than 20 years ago. 20 years ago, your company would be buying something from IBM, and there is one solution that does absolutely everything. That world doesn't exist anymore, and it will not exist anytime soon.
Right.
That means that actually everybody needs to have wide knowledge. I have a theory that, let's say that you're a developer, Java developer, right? If you don't know how to test your application will not be testable. If you don't have idea how your application will be running in production, it will run very badly, right? Because the choices you're making while doing your part of the story, the work, are going to bad choices if you don't understand, if you don't know the whole story.
Yeah.
Right? You need to have a bigger picture. So I believe that everybody needs to have certain level of knowledge of almost everything. Now, how you specialize from there, that's a different story, right?
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the unique path that I think we can all take, and that's our career. But yeah, having that understanding of the wider stuff is always, and that's the people I gravitate towards. Like I can always tell the best people in a team are the people that have, they dabble in a lot of things, but they're really good at a few, but they still dabble. And
exactly.
That maybe should be a new product name. I just made it up. Dabble. Dabble.io. I don't know if that exists, but well, thank you so much for your opinions. I always love talking with you, and we get so many great questions. This is why you're doing so well on your YouTube channel, killing it all the time with all these products and tools. Congratulations on the new gig. You can find Victor, by the way, on YouTube. I've put these are all in chat, and the links are below. Victor, you can see his Twitter handle below. And you can both of us are on Twitter all day chatting, so feel free to come talk to us, ask us questions there. Victor, what's your next thing? Are you doing another video? Obviously, you're doing more videos. So, can you give us a sneak peek? Like, what's the next thing you're releasing?
Yeah, I know only one video in advance. My brain cannot. I'm a very Kanban type of person. I do one thing at a time. Next one is going to be about Rancher Desktop.
Nice, Rancher. And Darren
Desktop.
Shepard, the CTO, is also someone that has been on this show, and I love talking about Rancher tools because they always are coming up with good ideas on stuff. So I'd love to see an update on Rancher Desktop because I haven't really touched it in about a year. So it would be great to hear. So I'll be checking out the DevOps Toolkit channel for that as soon as it drops on YouTube. Again, thank you so much for being on the show, everybody. Next week we're going to have someone else that I've got to look up because I always forget. Oh, that's right. We're doing Sneak next week because it's KubeCon. I don't know if you're Victor, if you're doing anything for KubeCon, but I will be there.
7
virtually.
sessions. Don't. I need to hibernate.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
After
I'm going to be
KubeCon.
watching. I'm not a part of it. I'm just watching. But we will be doing same time here next week. We will be doing infrastructure review of your code. I would love to see someone bringing some Crossplane there. That would tickle me because we just talked about it, and I don't know nothing about how to implement it, so I won't have any opinions. But bring your code, share it with us. You can share it with me now if you already have it on Twitter, or here in the YouTube comments below this video. We'll be back here next week, and we would love to have some stuff, whether it's sample projects or real world stuff, because we want to sort of throw down some opinions about how we use these tools, because I think sometimes the opinions help. So we're back here next week, same time, same channel, and as well as Victor is going to be on his. So thanks again, everyone. See you soon.
Cheers.